Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. The coffee that never diminishes. With the soft rustle of my slippers on the kitchen tile, each morning unfolds like a well-rehearsed ceremony. The gentle clink of the porcelain mug placed purposefully under the coffee machine. The satisfying click of the start button. It's a symphony of familiarity that crescendos with the rich aroma wafting through the air. The light from the window casts a warm glow on the countertop, painting the room in hues of dawn. Every day, without fail, I lift the steaming mug to my lips just as the clock's hand ticks to its half-hour mark. But today, as I sip, a subtle chill creeps over me. I lower the mug, peering into its depths. The liquid should have diminished, but it remains at the same level, unmoved, untouched. My fingers trace the handle, smooth and reassuring, though a slight tremor underscores my growing unease. The second hand ticks on, steady as before, yet the surface of the coffee remains unnervingly still. I observe my hand wrapped around the ceramic warmth, noting how the skin appears translucent in the morning light. The veins beneath pulse with a rhythm that feels foreign, as if watching someone else's circulation through borrowed flesh. My breathing creates small clouds in the suddenly cool air, each exhale visible and measured. Yet the sensation of air entering my lungs feels hollow, incomplete. The kitchen responds to my discomfort with subtle shifts. The overhead light dims without my touch, casting longer shadows that stretch across the tile floor like reaching fingers. The refrigerator's hum grows deeper, more resonant, vibrating through the soles of my feet and up into my chest, where it mingles with my heartbeat in an unsettling harmony. I set the mug down carefully, watching the liquid inside remain perfectly still despite the movement. The surface reflects the ceiling light in a way that seems wrong. The reflection too bright, too sharp, as if the coffee has become a mirror to somewhere else entirely. My reflection wavers in its depths, distorted and unfamiliar. The kitchen tiles beneath my feet begin to feel unstable, not quite solid. Each step produces that same soft rustle, but now the sound seems to come from above rather than below, as if I'm walking on the ceiling of an inverted room. The walls maintain their familiar cream color, yet they appear to breathe slightly, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that that matches neither my pulse nor my respiration. I find myself remembering a different kitchen, one with blue tiles and copper fixtures. The memory is vivid and complete, filled with the scent of cinnamon and the sound of rain against different windows. But I have never lived in such a place. The recollection sits in my mind with the weight of genuine experience, complete with emotional associations I cannot explain. More memories surface unbidden. A woman's laugh echoing from rooms I've never entered. The taste of tea prepared with honey and mint, though I drink only coffee. The feeling of small hands, not my own, reaching for items on high shelves. Each false memory carries the full texture of lived experience, yet none belong to the life I remember living. I reach for a notepad that sits beside the coffee machine, intending to document these strange recollections. But as my hand touches the paper, I discover words already written there in handwriting that resembles mine, yet feels foreign. The script describes the exact memories I was about to record, written in present tense, as if experienced in real time by someone else. The pen feels wrong in my grip, too light and too heavy simultaneously. My fingers remember different ways of holding it. Muscle memory for scripts I've never learned. When I attempt to write my own words, they emerge in that same unfamiliar handwriting, forming letters with flourishes I don't remember practicing. The coffee mug draws my attention again. I lift it once more, bringing it to lips that feel numb and distant. The liquid passes over my tongue without registering temperature or taste, yet my throat contracts with the motion of swallowing. The level remains unchanged, a dark mirror reflecting a face I'm beginning to doubt belongs to me. Sounds from within my own body grow amplified in the kitchen's strange acoustics. My heartbeat echoes off the walls with metallic resonance. The soft, wet sounds of swallowing become pronounced, almost mechanical. Beneath my skin, I can hear what sounds like electrical current, tiny sparks firing along neural pathways that feel newly formed and unfamiliar. The refrigerator door bears photographs held by magnets, but the faces in the images shift when I'm not looking directly at them. A child's smile becomes someone else's frown. A group photo rearranges its subjects, placing me in different positions, sometimes removing me entirely. The magnetic hold seems to pulse with the same rhythm as that electrical sound beneath my skin. I open the refrigerator, seeking the comfort of familiar contents, but the items inside seem to belong to someone else's preferences. Yogurt flavors I don't remember purchasing. Condiments for dishes I've never prepared. A half-eaten sandwich wrapped in paper with bite marks that don't match the shape of my teeth. The kitchen window shows a view I recognize, yet find somehow altered. The same trees, the same neighboring rooftops, but the shadows fall at impossible angles. The morning light carries a quality that seems both too warm and too cold, illuminating surfaces while leaving others in darkness that defies the sun's position. My reflection in the window glass appears delayed, moving a fraction behind my actual motions. When I raise my hand, the reflection follows after a pause that grows longer with each gesture. The face looking back carries expressions I don't remember making, subtle changes in the set of the mouth, and the focus of the eyes that suggest a different consciousness behind familiar features. The coffee machine begins another cycle without my activation, producing sounds that seem too loud, too deliberate. The gurgling water and hissing steam create a rhythm that matches the electrical pulses I feel beneath my skin. The fresh coffee that emerges fills a mug that appears identical to mine. Yet, when I compare them side by side, subtle differences emerge in the handle's curve and the rim's thickness. I find myself humming a melody I don't recognize, yet my voice carries it with the confidence of long familiarity. The tune seems to emerge from muscle memory in my vocal cords, bypassing conscious thought entirely. The sound of my own voice has taken on unfamiliar qualities, resonances and tones that suggest a different throat, different lungs, a different history of spoken words. The notepad fills with more writing that appears without my conscious effort. Detailed descriptions of places I've never been, conversations I've never had, emotions tied to experiences that belong to someone else's life. Yet, as I read these foreign memories, they begin to feel increasingly familiar, as if they're settling into spaces in my mind that were always meant to hold them. The kitchen floor begins to feel less solid beneath my feet. Not quite liquid, but unstable in a way that makes each step uncertain. The tiles seem to shift position slightly, creating new patterns that my eyes struggle to follow. The grout lines form geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly, angles that don't quite fit together in ways that should be possible. My hands explore the surfaces around me, seeking reassurance in familiar textures, but everything feels subtly wrong. The countertop's smooth surface carries an almost imperceptible grain that runs in directions I don't remember. The coffee machine's buttons respond to pressure differently, requiring more force or less, as if the mechanisms have been replaced with similar but not identical components. The electrical sound beneath my skin grows more pronounced, accompanied by sensations of movement that don't correspond to my pulse or breathing. It feels as if something is rewiring itself inside me, making new connections while severing old ones. The process carries no pain, only a strange sense of transformation that seems both foreign and inevitable. Standing in this kitchen that feels increasingly unfamiliar despite its unchanged appearance, I finally approach the small mirror that hangs beside the window. My reflection has been growing stranger throughout this morning, and I need to confront what I might see there. As I look into the silvered surface, my breath catches in my throat. The face looking back is not the one I expected to see. Yet, it's not entirely unfamiliar either. It carries elements I recognize mixed with features that belong to someone else entirely. The eyes hold memories I'm only beginning to understand, and the expression suggests a consciousness that has been waiting patiently for me to notice its presence. From this moment forward, everything changes. My hands feel different as they touch familiar objects, as if the nerve endings have been rewired to interpret sensation in new ways. My voice, when I attempt to speak, carries inflections and rhythms that belong to someone else's patterns of speech. Even my breathing has altered, deeper and more measured, as if my lungs have learned a different relationship with air. The kitchen around me settles into this new reality with subtle adjustments. The lighting finds a new balance, neither too bright nor too dim. The sounds of appliances and settling would create a different symphony, one that matches my transformed state. The coffee in my mug finally begins to diminish as I drink, though the taste carries notes I don't remember from before. With the soft rustle of my slippers on the kitchen tile, each morning unfolds like a well-rehearsed ceremony. The gentle clink of the porcelain mug, placed purposefully under the coffee machine. The satisfying click of the start button. It's a symphony of familiarity that crescendos with the rich aroma wafting through the air. The light from the window casts a warm glow on the countertop, painting the room in hues of dawn. Every day, without fail, I lift the steaming mug to my lips just as the clock's hand ticks to its half-hour mark. The ritual continues as it always has, though the consciousness performing it has quietly become something new. The coffee tastes exactly as it should. The morning light falls in familiar patterns, and my reflection in the window glass moves in perfect synchronization with my gestures. Yet beneath the surface of this restored normalcy, I carry the weight of memories that span more than one lifetime, experiences that have layered themselves into a consciousness that feels both ancient and newly born. The transformation is complete, seamless, leaving no trace of the disturbance that preceded it. The notepad beside the coffee machine remains blank, waiting for tomorrow's discoveries. Story 2. The first sensation was the air it twisted tightly around me, whispering secrets in a language I didn't quite comprehend. The walls were closer today, their pastel hues shifting under the weight of something unseen. Dust hung in the golden slant of morning light like suspended memories, each particle a fragment of forgotten whispers. The floor, once cool and grounding, now pulsed underfoot, matching the rhythm of a distant, unseen heartbeat. A scent lingered, unfamiliar and sweet, like aged paper mingling with rain-damp earth. It curled around my senses, drawing me toward the walled door that I had never noticed before. Smooth to the touch, its surface vibrated gently, as if resonating with some hidden sound. My fingers grazed its peculiar texture, half expecting a response, yet receiving none. A soft humming filled the space, without a source, rising and falling like a breath on the brink of awareness. Each swell amplified the uncanny quiet, as if the very air anticipated a revelation, yet withheld. I hesitated, tracing the faint outline of a handle, feeling the pull of something compelling, yet uncertain. The silence loomed larger, pregnant with the weight of untold stories. I pressed my palm flat against the door's surface. The vibration intensified, traveling up my arm like electricity seeking ground. My rational mind suggested plumbing issues, perhaps water running through pipes behind the wall. Yet, no water had ever run through this section of the building before. I knew every pipe, every wire, every structural beam in this place I called home. The humming shifted, becoming more defined. Not quite music, not quite voice, but something occupying the space between. I found myself leaning closer, my ear nearly touching the door's warm surface. The sound seemed to respond to my proximity, growing clearer, yet remaining frustratingly indecipherable. I retrieved my phone, opening the voice recording application. The screen flickered as I pressed record, displaying waveforms that didn't match what I heard. According to the device, only silence filled the room. I held it closer to the door, watching the flat line mock my experience. The humming continued, undeterred by technology's inability to capture it. My notebook lay on the nearby table, its pages yellowed with age despite being recently purchased. I documented the phenomenon methodically. The door's temperature, the vibration's frequency, the scent's intensity. Writing helped anchor me to logic, to the belief that every mystery possessed a rational explanation waiting to be uncovered. The pen felt heavier than usual, its ink flowing in patterns that seemed to curve beyond my conscious control. My handwriting, typically neat and controlled, sprawled across the page in loops and swirls that resembled the humming's cadence. I set the pen down, disturbed by my own lack of motor control. The door's handle materialized more clearly under my continued attention, as if my focus was slowly developing it like a photograph in chemical solution. I grasped it tentatively, expecting resistance, but it turned with surprising ease. The door swung inward, revealing not another room, but a continuation of the same space, identical in every detail except for the quality of light. This version of my room existed under different illumination, as if viewed through amber glass. The familiar furniture cast shadows in impossible directions, defying the light source's apparent position. I stepped across the threshold, feeling the air pressure change subtly, like ascending to a higher altitude. The humming grew louder here, accompanied by a new sound, pages turning. I followed the rustling to my desk, where a book lay open that I didn't remember placing there. Its pages fluttered without wind, revealing text that shifted and rearranged itself as I watched. The words were mine, copied from my notebook, but they told a different story, one where I had been documenting these experiences for much longer than I remembered. According to this phantom record, I had been visiting this alternate room for weeks, each entry describing progressively stranger encounters. I read about conversations with my own reflection, about finding personal items in places I had never been, about discovering photographs of myself in situations I couldn't recall experiencing. My reflection in the room's mirror caught my attention. It moved independently, turning to face me while I remained still. Its mouth opened and closed, forming words I couldn't hear over the humming. I approached the mirror, placing my hand against its surface. The glass felt warm and slightly yielding, like skin. The reflection pointed toward the window, its expression urgent. I followed its direction, seeing my familiar view transformed. The landscape outside existed in perpetual twilight, neither fully dark nor light. Figures moved through this eternal dusk, walking with purpose toward destinations I couldn't determine. They all possessed my silhouette, my gait, my general appearance. I pressed my face against the window, breath fogging the glass. One of the figures looked up, waving with my own hand, wearing my own expression of confused recognition. I waved back involuntarily, watching as all the other figures stopped their movement to observe our exchange. The humming reached a crescendo, and suddenly I could understand it. It wasn't music or voice, but the sound of choices being made, of realities branching and converging like rivers meeting the sea. Each note represented a decision I had made or might make, creating infinite variations of this moment, this room, this experience. I stumbled backward, overwhelmed by the implications. The book on my desk continued turning its pages, now showing entries I was certain I had never written, describing encounters I was certain I had never experienced. Yet the handwriting remained unmistakably mine, down to the peculiar way I dotted my letters when concentrating. The door behind me had vanished, replaced by solid wall. I ran my hands across its surface, finding no trace of the entrance I had used. The room had become a perfect replica of my original space, except for the persistent humming and the impossible book that documented my impossible experiences. I tried to tear pages from the book, but they reformed instantly, the text reappearing as if written by an invisible hand. My attempts to close it proved futile. It remained open to entries that detailed my growing desperation, my failed escape attempts, my gradual acceptance of circumstances beyond rational explanation. The mirror reflection had returned to normal synchronization, but occasionally I caught it moving independently in my peripheral vision. The figures outside the window continued their purposeful wandering, sometimes gathering in groups to point at my window before dispersing again. I began writing in my physical notebook, hoping to distinguish between the phantom record and my actual experience. But as I wrote, the words appeared simultaneously in the mysterious book, as if both were connected by invisible threads. My documentation of the phenomenon became part of the phenomenon itself, creating a loop of observation and participation that defied logical resolution. The room's temperature fluctuated without pattern, sometimes warm enough to induce perspiration, other moments cold enough to see my breath. The walls occasionally rippled like water, their pastel colors bleeding into one another before reasserting their original boundaries. Sleep became impossible. When I closed my eyes, the humming intensified, accompanied by the sensation of being watched by countless versions of myself. I could feel their attention like weight on my skin, their curiosity about my choices, their judgment of my reactions to our shared predicament. The scent of aged paper and rain-damp earth had evolved, now carrying undertones of copper and ozone, like the air before a storm. It seemed to emanate from the book, which had grown thicker despite my never seeing new pages added. The entries now extended far into the future, describing experiences I had yet to have, reactions I had yet to feel, discoveries I had yet to make. I realized I was no longer alone in the room. The presence was subtle but undeniable, like sensing someone standing just outside your field of vision. When I turned to look, nothing appeared different, yet the feeling persisted. The humming seemed to respond to this invisible companion, modulating its tone in what resembled conversation. My phone had stopped functioning properly, its screen displaying images from my photo gallery that I had never taken. Pictures of me sleeping in beds I didn't recognize, eating meals I couldn't remember, talking to people whose faces were always just out of focus. The device's clock had frozen, its hands pointing to positions that formed symbols rather than indicating any meaningful measurement. The notebook in my hands had begun writing itself, my pen moving across the page, guided by some external force. I watched helplessly as it documented thoughts I wasn't thinking, observations I wasn't making, conclusions I wasn't drawing. Yet the insights felt familiar, as if I had always known them, but had forgotten until seeing them written. The humming suddenly stopped. In the absolute silence that followed, I could hear my heartbeat, my breathing, the subtle sounds of my body existing in space. But I could also hear other heartbeats, other breathing, other bodies existing in parallel spaces that somehow occupied the same location as mine. The book's pages began turning rapidly, showing me entry after entry of similar experiences by other versions of myself, each trapped in their own variation of this room, this situation, this impossible circumstance. Some had been here longer, their entries describing years of exploration and failed escape attempts. Others were newer, their confusion and fear still fresh on the page. I understood then that I had become part of something larger than my individual experience. The room existed as a nexus point where multiple realities converged, each containing a version of myself discovering the same impossible truth. We were all connected by our shared investigation, our mutual documentation, our collective inability to return to the simple reality we had known before. The humming resumed, but now I could distinguish individual voices within it, each one representing a different version of myself, calling across the dimensional barriers that separated our experiences. We were trying to communicate, to share information, to find some collaborative solution to our predicament. But as I listened more carefully, I realized we weren't calling for help or sharing solutions. We were warning each other about what comes next, about discoveries yet to be made, about the price of understanding too much about the nature of reality's flexibility. The room began to shift around me, its walls expanding and contracting like breathing. I could see through them now, glimpsing other versions of the same space, each occupied by a different version of myself at various stages of this same journey. Some were just discovering the door. Others were reading the mysterious book. Still others were staring out the window at their own parade of alternate selves. I closed my eyes, but the visions continued. I could see the network of connected rooms, connected experiences, connected versions of myself, all trapped in their own investigation of the same phenomenon. We were like insects in amber, preserved in the moment of our discovery, unable to move forward or backward from the instant we chose to open that door. When I opened my eyes, the room had returned to its original appearance, but I knew it was only temporary. The humming continued, softer now, but constant, a reminder that what I had experienced was real and ongoing. The book remained open on my desk, its pages no longer turning, but still displaying entries that detailed experiences I had yet to have. I sit here now, writing this final entry, knowing that it will appear in the mysterious book before I finish forming the words. I can feel the other versions of myself reading along, recognizing their own thoughts in my documentation, understanding that we are all part of the same impossible story. The door has reappeared, but I no longer feel compelled to use it. I know now that it doesn't lead to escape, but to deeper levels of the same mystery. The humming has become as familiar as my own breathing, and the scent of aged paper and rain-damp earth has become the smell of home. I am no longer trying to solve the mystery or return to my previous reality. I have become part of the phenomenon I sought to understand, a living component of something that exists beyond rational explanation. The room pulses around me with the rhythm of that distant heartbeat, and I finally understand that the heartbeat is mine, echoing across infinite variations of this same moment. The other versions of myself wave from their windows, and I wave back, acknowledging our shared fate with something that might be acceptance or might be resignation. We are all here together, separated by dimensional barriers, but united by our common experience of discovering that reality is far more flexible than we ever imagined. The humming continues, and I listen, knowing that somewhere in its endless variations lies the sound of every choice I have ever made, and every choice I will ever make, all happening simultaneously in this space between spaces. This room that exists everywhere and nowhere. This moment that lasts forever. Story 3. The pattern between raindrops. The room shimmered with a peculiar light, a muted glow that seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves, distorting the familiar pattern of shadows cast by the dim lamps. The air held the scent of distant rain, though the windows remained dry, and outside, the sky hung heavy with an unmoving metallic hue. Each breath I took felt like an intrusion upon the thick stillness that enveloped me. A stillness punctuated by the faintest of whispers, an echo where none should be. Beneath my fingers, the texture of the worn velvet armchair felt unusually warm, as if it harbored a secret pulse, imperceptibly thrumming in time with the erratic tick of the clock that never kept time right. The clock's hands moved with a mind of their own, jumping erratically from second to second, as if taunting reason itself. Somewhere near, yet impossibly distant, the sound of rain persisted, a patter against a surface I could not identify. Each droplet sounded crystalline, unnervingly precise, as if rehearsed. I discerned a pattern, or perhaps the suggestion of one, hidden within the rhythm, a pattern that stirred an unease deep within, a signal of something just out of reach, whispering in a language half remembered, almost forgotten. I remember this moment, though I cannot place when it began. The memory feels borrowed, like wearing clothes that belong to someone else. My fingers trace the armrest, and the velvet responds with that strange warmth, as if recognizing touch it has known before. The sensation travels up my arm, a gentle electric current that makes me question whether I am truly sitting here or merely observing myself from somewhere else entirely. The radio in the corner speaks without being turned on. Its voice is soft, conversational, discussing weather patterns that don't match what I see through the window. The announcer mentions temperatures and wind speeds with the casual authority of someone reading from a script. But when I look directly at the device, its silence is absolute. Only when I turn away does the voice return, describing rain that falls upward and clouds that cast shadows on themselves. I reach for the notebook on the side table, its leather cover worn smooth by countless hands. My handwriting fills the pages, though I don't remember writing these words. The ink is still wet, forming sentences that describe this very moment, this very confusion. As I read, my own voice narrates the words aloud, creating a strange harmony between what I see and what I hear myself saying. The floor beneath my feet grows warm like skin, I read, and immediately feel the floorboards respond, their wooden surface taking on the temperature and give of living flesh. My toes curl involuntarily as the sensation spreads, the entire room seeming to breathe around me. The walls expand and contract with a rhythm that matches my own heartbeat, though I cannot tell which came first. I write, the note on the mantelpiece changes changes its message when I look away. And there it is, a folded piece of paper I hadn't noticed before, sitting beside a photograph of people I should recognize but don't. The note, when opened, contains a single word, remember. But when I glance toward the window and back again, the word has shifted to forget. Another glance away and back reveals begin. The scent of distant rain grows stronger, though the windows remain stubbornly dry. I can taste the moisture in the air, metallic and sharp, like pennies dissolving on my tongue. Each breath carries the essence of storms that exist only in the space between my thoughts and the room's response to them. The smell triggers flashes of visual memory, puddles reflecting nothing, umbrellas that cast shadows upward, streets that curve impossibly back upon themselves. Something moves in my peripheral vision, but when I turn, there is only the familiar arrangement of furniture and the persistent, sourceless light. Yet the sense of presence remains, a weight in the air that suggests observation, evaluation, perhaps even judgment. The walls seem to tilt slightly toward me, as if leaning in to listen to thoughts I haven't yet formed. I write faster now, trying to capture the experience before it dissolves. The presence watches without eyes, listens without ears, knows without learning. My handwriting becomes more urgent, the letters pressing deeper into the paper. But when I pause to reread what I've written, the script has changed. The words are the same, but the formation of each letter belongs to someone else's hand, someone whose muscle memory has guided my pen. The clock's erratic ticking creates a rhythm that my pulse begins to follow. Or perhaps my pulse has been leading all along. The sound echoes strangely in the room, as if the walls are hollow and filled with smaller rooms, each containing its own version of this moment. I hear my own breathing multiplied, a chorus of inhalations and exhalations that don't quite match the movement of my chest. The radio announcer mentions my name, though I cannot recall giving it to anyone. The voice describes my location with impossible precision, detailing the angle of light across my face and the way my fingers drum against the armrest. When I focus on the radio directly, it falls silent, but I can feel its attention like a physical pressure against my skin. I stand and walk toward the window, but the distance never changes. Each step forward seems to move the glass further away, maintaining the same impossible gap. The floorboards warm under my feet, their wooden grain shifting to accommodate the shape of my souls. Behind me, I hear the soft whisper of pages turning, though I left the notebook closed on the table. The pattern in the rain sound becomes more insistent, more complex. It speaks in mathematical sequences that my mind recognizes but cannot decode. Each drop contains a message, a fragment of instruction or warning. I press my ear to the window, but the glass is warm like skin, and the sound comes from within the room itself, from the walls that breathe and the floor that pulses with borrowed life. I return to the notebook, driven by a need to document what cannot be documented. My pen moves across the page with increasing urgency. The room remembers what I forget. The light holds conversations with shadows I cannot see. The air tastes of copper and anticipation. But as I write, I watch the words change beneath my pen, shifting from my intended meaning to something else entirely. Something that knows more than I do about what is happening here. The photograph on the mantelpiece shows faces that become more familiar each time I look, though I cannot place them in any specific memory. They smile with the confidence of people who know something I should know, something that hovers just beyond the edge of recognition. Their eyes follow my movement around the room, and their smiles never change, never falter, never acknowledge the impossibility of their persistence. I walk through a doorway that leads back to the same room, but the furniture has shifted slightly. The armchair faces a different direction. The radio has moved 3 inches to the left. The notebook lies open to a page I hadn't reached, filled with my handwriting describing events that haven't happened yet. Or perhaps they have happened, and I am the one who has shifted, who has become displaced in the careful arrangement of this recurring space. The presence grows stronger with each circuit through the room. It doesn't reveal itself through sight or sound, but through the way the air thickens around certain spaces, the way the light bends to accommodate something that shouldn't be there. I feel watched, studied, catalogued. My movements become more deliberate, performed for an audience that exists in the spaces between what I can perceive and what I can understand. Each time I return to the starting point, something has changed. Not dramatically, not obviously, but with the subtle persistence of water wearing away stone. The clock's hands move differently. The rain's pattern shifts by a single note. The warmth of the floor spreads to different areas, and I change too, though I cannot identify how. My reflection in the window glass becomes less familiar. My own voice sounds foreign when I read from the notebook. My handwriting belongs increasingly to someone else. The radio speaks of weather systems that exist only in rooms like this one, atmospheric pressures that build between walls and consciousness. The announcer's voice becomes more intimate, more personal, as if speaking directly into my ear rather than through the speakers. The voice knows things about me that I have forgotten, describes habits and preferences that feel both foreign and deeply familiar. I write, I am becoming the room's memory of itself. The words appear on the page before my pen forms them, and I watch myself trace over letters that already exist. The notebook contains conversations between versions of myself, some written in ink, others in pencil, still others in substances I cannot identify. Each entry describes this same moment from a slightly different perspective, as if multiple observers are documenting the same impossible event. The scent of rain intensifies until I can taste individual droplets, each one carrying the essence of different storms, different skies, different versions of this room, where the rain falls in patterns that spell out messages in languages that exist only in the space between thought and sensation. The metallic taste grows stronger, more complex, until it becomes a flavor I recognize but cannot name, something that belongs to memories I haven't formed yet. The walls pulse with increasing rhythm, their breathing synchronized with something larger than my own heartbeat, something that encompasses the room and extends beyond it into spaces I cannot see, but can feel pressing against the boundaries of this contained experience. The light shifts with each pulse, creating shadows that move independently of their sources, shadows that seem to cast the objects rather than being cast by them. I walk the circuit again, but this time the doorway leads to a room that is almost identical, but not quite. The differences are subtle. The pattern in the wallpaper has shifted by a fraction. The clock's face shows numbers in a different arrangement. The radio plays music that exists only in the silence between its notes. I am still myself, but my reflection in the window shows someone who remembers things I have forgotten, someone who knows the purpose of this repetition. The notebook writes itself now, my hand merely following the words that appear. The handwriting cycles through different styles, different pressures, different personalities, each one documenting their own version of this experience. Some entries are frantic, desperate to escape. Others are calm, accepting. A few seem to welcome the dissolution of boundaries between self and space, between between memory and experience, between what is real and what is more real than reality. The presence reveals itself not through appearance, but through absence, through the spaces where something should be but isn't, where the air holds the shape of attention without form. I feel observed by something that exists in the gaps between my thoughts, something that knows me better than I know myself, because it has watched this process before, guided it, perhaps even initiated it. Each circuit through the room strips away another layer of certainty. I forget my name, then remember a different one. I forget the reason I came here, then remember reasons that belong to other visitors, other participants in this careful ritual of dissolution. The rain's pattern becomes my heartbeat, my breathing, my thoughts themselves, until I cannot tell where the sound ends and my consciousness begins. The radio announces my departure before I decide to leave, describes my movements before I make them, narrates my thoughts in a voice that sounds increasingly like my own, but speaks with knowledge I don't possess. The announcer has become me, or I have become the announcer, or we have both become something else entirely, something that exists to document the process of transformation that occurs in rooms like this one. I write the final entry, though I cannot remember picking up the pen. The room is ready for the next visitor. The pattern is complete. The rain will begin again, falling in rhythms that will seem familiar to someone who has never heard them before. The chair will be warm with welcome. The light will shimmer with possibility, and someone new will sit where I sit now, feeling the floor pulse beneath their feet, hearing voices from radios that aren't turned on, reading words that write themselves in notebooks that remember everything and forget nothing. The room shimmers with that same peculiar light. But now I understand that the glow comes from within the walls, because the walls have absorbed the warmth and confusion and wonder of everyone who has sat in this chair, everyone who has walked this circuit, everyone who has dissolved into the space between what they were and what they are becoming. I am no longer sure who is writing these words, who is thinking these thoughts, who is experiencing this careful unraveling of self into something larger and more diffuse. The notebook closes itself. The radio falls silent. The rain continues its precise pattern, waiting for the next listener to decode its message, to feel its rhythm become their own, to join the chorus of voices that exist now in the breathing walls and the warm floor and the light that holds conversations with shadows cast by nothing at all. pattern begins again. Story 4. The weight of memory. The mornings had taken on a frostier edge, and I found myself reaching for the quilt draped over the armchair more frequently. Its familiar weight and softness were a comfort against the chill that crept through the room. One evening, as I settled into my usual corner, the quilt felt unusually heavy, the texture subtly altered under my fingertips. The fabric was cool, almost metallic, against my skin. I adjusted it, trying to dispel the peculiar sensation that it enfolded something unseen, something that shifted just beneath the surface. With each rustle, a soft, almost mechanical murmur whispered through the stillness, the fabric echoing a sound I couldn't place. Sitting quietly, I listened as the odd cadence played softly in the dimness, the quilt seeming to breathe along, absorbing the room's silence in an unsettling symphony. I remember a room, or perhaps I imagine it. The walls were painted a color that doesn't exist anymore, something between cream and shadow. There was a window, but I can't recall what lay beyond it. Only the sensation of light filtering through, casting patterns that moved without wind to disturb them. My hands were smaller then, reaching for something on a table that might have been mahogany, might have been oak. The wood grains spiraled beneath my palm like water frozen mid-flow. The memory dissolves as I write these words, ink bleeding slightly into paper that feels too thin, too willing to accept my thoughts. The radio sits silent on the shelf, its cord unplugged and coiled like a sleeping serpent. Yet, as I fold the quilt, pressing it against my chest, I hear music drifting from its speaker grill. A melody I recognize, but cannot name, played on instruments that sound almost right, but not quite. The volume swells when I turn away, diminishes when I face it directly. I approach slowly, my bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. The floor beneath me grows warm, responding to each step as if awakening from deep sleep. The heat spreads outward in circles, following the rhythm of my pulse. I pause, feeling the boards expand and contract like breathing ribs. When I kneel and press my palm flat against the surface, the warmth travels up my arm, settling somewhere behind my sternum where it thrums in harmony with the phantom radio. On the kitchen counter, I find a note written in my handwriting. The message is simple. Remember to check the locks before sleeping. I read it twice, then look away to reach for a glass of water. When I glance back, the words have rearranged themselves. The locks remember you sleeping. The ink is still wet, glistening under the overhead light that I don't remember turning on. I write constantly now, filling pages with observations that feel important in the moment of recording. My pen moves across paper with a scratching sound that echoes strangely in the quiet house. But when I return to read what I've written, the handwriting slopes differently than I remember. The letters lean backward instead of forward, the pressure lighter, as if someone with smaller hands had borrowed my thoughts and transcribed them with unfamiliar fingers. The hallway stretches longer than it should, lined with doors I've walked past countless times. Tonight, each door stands slightly ajar, revealing slivers of darkness that seem to breathe. I count them as I pass. 1, 2, 3, 4. At the end of the hall, I turn around and count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The additional door is painted the same color as the others, its brass handle worn smooth by hands I cannot remember using it. Something moves with me through these rooms, staying always at the periphery of my awareness. Not footsteps, but the suggestion of footsteps. Not breathing, but the pause between breaths. When I stop suddenly, hoping to catch it off guard, the silence becomes so complete it presses against my eardrums like water. In that absolute quiet, I hear my own heartbeat echoing back from the walls, as if the house has learned to mimic the sound. The mirror in the bathroom reflects everything correctly except my eyes. They appear a shade darker than they should be, pupils dilated despite the bright vanity lights. When I lean closer, studying my reflection, my mirrored self leans away slightly, maintaining a distance that shouldn't be possible. I raise my right hand. The reflection raises its left, then corrects itself with a delay that makes my stomach clench. I return to the living room, to the armchair where this all began. The quilt lies exactly where I left it, but its pattern has shifted. The geometric design now forms shapes that suggest faces in profile, watching eyes, reaching hands. I wrap it around my shoulders and feel that same metallic coolness against my skin. But now, it carries a scent I recognize from somewhere deep in my memory. Lavender mixed with something clinical, antiseptic. The room repeats itself. I walk from the armchair to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the hallway, from the hallway back to the armchair. Each circuit reveals small changes. A book moved from one shelf to another, a cup appearing on the side table, the angle of light through the window shifting, though no time seems to pass. On the seventh circuit, I notice my reflection in the dark window walking slightly behind me. struggling to keep pace. I write these observations frantically, trying to anchor myself to something concrete. But the words flow too easily, as if they're being dictated rather than composed. My hand moves across the page without conscious direction, forming sentences that surprise me with their precision. When I pause to rest my cramping fingers, I discover I've been writing with my left hand, though I've always been right-handed. The quilt grows heavier with each passing moment, its weight settling into my bones. I try to remove it, but my arms won't cooperate. The fabric has become part of me, or I have become part of it. The mechanical murmur I first noticed has grown into a symphony of whispers, too quiet to understand, but too persistent to ignore. They seem to emanate from the threads themselves, each fiber vibrating with barely audible sound. In the kitchen, I open the refrigerator and find it empty except for a single glass of milk that wasn't there before. The liquid is perfectly white, perfectly still, reflecting the interior light like a mirror. When I lift the glass, the milk moves strangely, too thick, too slow. I set it down without drinking, and when I look again, the glass is empty, but still feels full in my memory. The circuits continue. Armchair to kitchen to hallway and back. Each loop strips away something I thought I knew about myself. My name becomes uncertain, a collection of syllables that might belong to someone else. My reflection grows more unfamiliar, features shifting subtly until I'm looking at a stranger who wears my clothes and stands in my house. The quilt remains constant, the only thing that still feels real, though its reality is the most impossible of all. I find myself speaking aloud, narrating my movements to an audience I cannot see but feel watching. My voice sounds different in the altered acoustics of the repeating room, higher pitched, younger. The words I choose are not the ones I intended to say, but they feel true in ways that disturb me. I describe sensations I haven't experienced and memories that belong to someone else. The note on the counter changes again. You are remembering correctly. Then, correctly, you are remembering. Then, remembering you correctly. The handwriting grows smaller with each transformation, cramped and urgent, as if space is running out. On the 15th circuit, or perhaps the 50th, I realize I am no longer alone in my walking. Footsteps accompany mine, matching my pace exactly, but arriving a fraction of a second late, like an echo that precedes its source. When I stop, the other footsteps continue for one more step before falling silent. I begin to walk in irregular patterns, changing direction suddenly. But the phantom steps adapt, learning my rhythms faster than I can change them. The walls breathe now, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that doesn't match my heartbeat or my breathing. The house has developed its own pulse, its own needs. When I press my ear against the wallpaper, I hear circulation, the movement of something that might be blood or might be memory flowing through hidden channels. I write, "The house remembers everyone who has lived here." But when I look at the page, it reads, "Everyone who has lived here becomes the house." The correction is made in my handwriting, but I don't remember making it. My pen hovers over the paper, trembling slightly, as if deciding whether to write more without my permission. The quilt whispers my name, or what I think is my name. The sound comes from deep within its fibers, a chorus of voices too small to hear individually, but unmistakable in aggregate. I try to respond, but my voice catches in my throat. When I finally manage to speak, the words that emerge are, "I remember you too." The room shifts around me, walls sliding past each other like stage flats being rearranged. The armchair remains stationary while everything else rotates, creating new configurations of familiar objects. The radio moves from shelf to table to floor, always maintaining its phantom broadcast. The mirror reflects rooms I haven't entered, showing me angles of my house that shouldn't exist. I am walking through the same space, but it is no longer the same space. Each circuit takes me deeper into something that wears the appearance of my home, but serves a different purpose. The quilt grows heavier still, its weight pulling me downward, though my feet remain on solid ground. I feel myself sinking into memory, into possibility, into the spaces between thoughts where logic loses its grip. The handwriting in my notebook changes mid-sentence, shifting from my careful script to something flowing and unfamiliar. The new hand writes, "We have been waiting for you to understand." I want to ask who "we" refers to, but I already know the answer. The house is full of previous occupants, previous minds that made these same circuits, wrapped themselves in this same quilt, felt this same metallic coolness against their skin. The final circuit begins without my choosing it. My feet carry me from armchair to kitchen to hallway, but the route has changed. New doors have appeared, leading to rooms that extend beyond the physical boundaries of the house. I walk through spaces that exist only in memory, only in potential. The quilt trails falls behind me now, no longer wrapped around my shoulders, but flowing like a river of fabric that connects everything I have been to everything I might become. I arrive back at the armchair, but I am no longer the person who began this journey. My thoughts feel borrowed, my memories edited by unseen hands. When I sit down, the cushions conform to a different body, one that might be mine or might belong to whoever comes next. The quilt settles over me with familiar weight, but I no longer recognize its pattern. Someone else will find this notebook, will read these words with fresh eyes, and think they understand. They will wrap themselves in the quilt on cold evenings, feeling its strange weight and altered texture. They will hear the mechanical murmur and think it's the house settling, the radio playing phantom songs from some distant station. The cycle completes itself, ready to begin again. I am no longer writing these words, they are writing themselves through me, preparing for the next mind that will need to learn what I have learned. The quilt breathes softly in the dimness, patient and eternal, waiting for new hands to discover its impossible weight. Story 5. The unmoored hands. I watched the hands drift, soundless, detached from the mechanism beneath the clock face. Each second ticked without their touch, a rhythm divorced from their motion. My fingers brushed the surface, anticipating the cool glass, yet encountered an unsettling warmth, as if the object pulsed with its own life. Subtle vibrations thrummed through the tabletop, reaching my fingertips with a hypnotic consistency. I was compelled to trace the invisible path they carved in midair, each pass leaving a ghostly shiver under my skin. The absence of their control unsettled something deeper within, a longing for the familiar tether of time that evaded my understanding. The skin on my hands looked different in the amber light filtering through the curtains. Not my skin exactly. The texture seemed too smooth, too uniform, as if someone had carefully painted flesh over an unfamiliar framework. When I flexed my fingers, the movement felt delayed, disconnected from my intention. The sensation of watching myself from somewhere just behind my own eyes grew stronger with each passing moment. My breath came in shallow waves, each exhalation creating small clouds in air that should have been warm. The sound echoed strangely in my chest, as if my lungs had shifted position overnight. I pressed my palm against my ribs, feeling for the familiar rhythm of my heartbeat, but found instead a stuttering pulse that seemed to originate from multiple points beneath my skin. The room responded to my growing unease. The wallpaper, with its faded floral pattern, began to shift almost imperceptibly. Petals that had been pink moments before now carried hints of deep burgundy, their edges curling inward as if wilting in real time. The overhead light dimmed without my touching the switch, casting longer shadows that stretched toward me like reaching fingers. I tried to focus on the clock again, seeking anchor in its steady mechanism. But the hands continued their disconnected dance. They moved with purpose, tracing patterns that had nothing to do with measuring time. Sometimes they overlapped. Sometimes they spun backward, always maintaining that eerie silence that made my teeth ache. The hardwood floor beneath my feet felt unstable, as if the boards were slowly expanding and contracting with each breath I took. When I shifted my weight, the surface yielded slightly, more like walking on a thick carpet than solid wood. The sensation traveled up through my legs, a peculiar tingling that reminded me of standing too close to powerful electrical equipment. My voice, when I tried to hum a familiar tune, came out wrong. The pitch wavered in places where it should have been steady, and the tone carried an unfamiliar rasp that scratched at my throat. I touched my neck, feeling for swelling or irritation, but found only smooth skin that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. Strange images began flickering through my mind like half-remembered dreams. A woman with silver hair standing in a kitchen I had never seen, stirring something that smelled of cinnamon and decay. A child's laughter echoing from an empty playground where the swings moved without wind. The sensation of cold water rising around my ankles in a basement that existed nowhere in my memory. I found myself reaching for a notebook that sat on the side table, my hand moving without conscious direction. The pages were filled with handwriting that looked almost like mine, but the letters slanted differently, and the pressure of the pen had been lighter than I typically used. The words described experiences I couldn't recall living. Walking through snow that fell upward, tasting salt in air that should have been sweet, hearing music that played only when no one was listening. The entries were dated, but with symbols I didn't recognize. Some pages contained sketches of faces that felt familiar yet foreign, eyes that seemed to track my movement across the paper. One drawing showed hands reaching toward a clock face, but the perspective was wrong, as if viewed from inside the mechanism looking out. As I read, the electrical humming under my skin grew more pronounced. It started as a subtle vibration in my fingertips, but spread up my arms and across my chest, creating a network of sensation that felt both alien and oddly comforting. The sound reminded me of old fluorescent lights, that constant buzz that becomes background noise, until suddenly you notice it everywhere. The room's geometry seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. The corner where the bookshelf stood appeared closer than before, and the ceiling felt lower, as if the space were gradually compressing around me. When I turned my head quickly, I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that shouldn't have been there rearranging themselves back into normal positions, more memories that weren't mine surfaced with increasing frequency. The taste of medicine I had never taken, bitter and metallic on my tongue. The feeling of rain on skin that had never been caught in that particular storm. Conversations in voices I didn't recognize, speaking words I somehow understood despite never having heard the language before. I began to suspect that someone else had been living in my body, using my hands to write those notes, seeing through my eyes to sketch those unfamiliar faces. But the more I considered this possibility, the more I wondered if perhaps I was the intruder, the foreign presence disturbing someone else's carefully ordered existence. The clock's hands moved faster now, spinning in circles that defied any earthly timekeeping. Their motion created a slight breeze that I felt on my face, carrying sense of places I had never been. Ocean spray mixed with pine needles, the metallic tang of city air combined with the sweetness of honeysuckle. Each breath brought new combinations, memories attached to smells that belonged to a life I couldn't access. My reflection caught my attention in the dark screen of the television across the room. Even from that distance, something about the silhouette seemed wrong. The proportions didn't match what I expected to see, as if my body had been subtly rearranged while I wasn't paying attention. I stood slowly, each movement feeling deliberate and foreign, and walked toward the bathroom where a proper mirror waited. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, each step echoing with a hollow sound that suggested vast spaces beyond the walls. The carpet runner beneath my feet had changed color, shifting from deep blue to a mottled green that reminded me of pond water. Pictures hanging on the walls showed scenes that flickered between familiar and strange, faces that morphed when I wasn't looking directly at them. The bathroom door stood slightly ajar, revealing a slice of silver mirror that reflected nothing but darkness. I pushed it open with fingers that trembled with anticipation and dread. The fluorescent light buzzed to life overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everything appear stark and unfamiliar. I approached the mirror slowly, my reflection sliding into view piece by piece. First my hands, then my arms, then my torso, and finally my face. What I saw there stopped my breath completely, sent ice through my veins and electricity across every nerve ending. The features were wrong in ways I couldn't articulate, familiar yet impossibly foreign, as if someone had tried to recreate my face from a description rather than direct observation. I pressed my palms against the cool glass, watching as the reflection did the same, but with a slight delay that made my stomach lurch. The eyes looking back at me held knowledge I didn't possess, experiences I couldn't access, a depth of understanding that felt ancient and terrifying. From that moment, everything changed. My hands felt different as they touched objects, more sensitive to texture and temperature, but somehow disconnected from my will. My voice, when I tried to speak, came out in tones that belonged to someone else entirely. Even my breathing felt foreign, as if I were learning how to fill lungs that had never been mine. The electrical sensation under my skin intensified, creating patterns of sensation that mapped territories I couldn't name. Each pulse brought flashes of memory that weren't mine. Standing in rain that fell sideways, tasting food that had never existed, hearing music composed in dreams that belonged to another sleeper. I returned to the living room, moving with steps that felt both careful and automatic. The clock face had gone dark, its hands frozen in positions that suggested no earthly hour. But I could still hear the ticking, emanating now from inside my own chest, a rhythm that had nothing to do with the heart that beat there. The notebook lay open to a fresh page, and I found myself writing in handwriting that was almost, but not quite my own. The words flowed without conscious thought, describing sensations and experiences that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. As I wrote, I began to understand that this had all happened before, would happen again, was happening now to someone else who thought they were me. I watched the hands drift, soundless, detached from the mechanism beneath the clock face. Each second ticked without their touch, a rhythm divorced from their motion. The fingers that brushed the surface, anticipating cool glass, yet encountering unsettling warmth, belonged to someone who had never been me at all. Subtle vibrations thrummed through the tabletop, reaching fingertips that had learned to trace invisible paths in midair. Each pass leaving ghostly shivers under skin that had forgotten its original owner. The absence of control no longer unsettled anything deeper within, for the familiar tether of time had been severed completely, leaving only the endless cycle of discovery and dissolution. The perpetual dance of consciousness finding itself trapped in borrowed flesh, forever seeking recognition in mirrors that reflected only strangers. Story 6. The Porcelain Protocol. Section 1. Initial observation. Fingers brushed across the porcelain handle, feeling its cool, unyielding surface respond with a slight, inexplicable tremor. The faucet dripped persistently, each drop landing with an unnerving precision that echoed throughout the room. A rhythmic, yet offbeat hum seemed to rise from nowhere, vibrating up my arm as I twisted the handle slowly, fully expecting resistance. Instead, it moved of its own accord, spinning smoothly, freely, as if animated by some unseen force. I watched, transfixed, as water began to flow, silencing the drip. Yet, in the ensuing rush, a subtle whisper threaded through the sound, teasing at the edges of comprehension, a voice not my own. This marks the beginning of my observation protocol. Mental state, stable. Environmental conditions, standard residential bathroom, fluorescent lighting at approximately 70% intensity. The fixture in question appears to be standard chrome-plated brass construction, though tactile examination suggests unusual thermal conductivity. Temperature readings of surrounding surfaces register within normal parameters. The anomalous vibration mentioned above occurs at irregular intervals, lasting approximately 3 to 4 seconds per occurrence. No mechanical explanation readily apparent. I have decided to document these phenomena as part of a comprehensive self-assessment. Cognitive function remains unimpaired. Sensory perception operating within expected ranges, with the noted exception of the auditory anomaly described above. Section 2. continued monitoring. The whisper has returned on 3 separate occasions. Each instance occurs precisely when water pressure reaches peak flow. The voice carries feminine characteristics, though linguistic content remains indistinct. Phonetic analysis suggests syllabic patterns consistent with conversational speech, yet no recognizable words emerge. I have repositioned my recording equipment closer to the source. Playback reveals only standard water flow sounds. This discrepancy warrants further investigation, additional observation. The bathroom mirror reflects my image with standard clarity, though peripheral vision occasionally detects movement within the reflection that does not correspond to my own actions. Direct observation of the mirror surface reveals nothing unusual. Glass appears recently cleaned, despite my lack of memory regarding such maintenance. The fluorescent bulb overhead exhibits minor fluctuations in luminosity. These variations follow no discernible pattern, though they seem to intensify during periods of auditory anomaly. Section 3. Environmental changes. My notes from the previous section contain alterations I do not remember making. Certain words appear crossed out and replaced with others, though the handwriting matches my own. The original text beneath the corrections remains legible. Where I had written standard, someone has changed it to shifting. Where I had noted 3 separate occasions, the number has been altered to countless. These modifications concern me, though I maintain confidence in my observational capabilities. The scent of lavender has begun permeating the space, despite the absence of any soap, air freshener, or cleaning products containing such fragrance. The aroma carries an oddly nostalgic quality, evoking memories of someone I cannot quite place. A woman, perhaps, though no specific face emerges from these recollections. The porcelain handle now requires significantly less pressure to operate. What once demanded a firm grip now responds to the slightest touch, sometimes activating before physical contact occurs. I have verified that my hand approaches within 2 inches of the surface before water begins flowing. Section 4. Perceptual inconsistencies. The whisper has evolved into what I can only describe as questioning intonation. Though individual words remain unclear, the vocal patterns suggest inquiry, as if someone seeks responses to unheard questions. I find myself nodding occasionally, though I cannot explain why. My reflection in the mirror appears slightly delayed, creating a disconcerting lag between my movements and their visual representation. The delay measures approximately half a second, though this estimation may be unreliable given my current state of heightened awareness. The bathroom walls, previously painted in standard off-white, now display subtle variations in hue. Patches of pale blue appear near the ceiling, while areas around the baseboards show hints of rose-colored tinting. These changes manifest gradually, becoming more pronounced during extended observation periods. I have begun to question whether these phenomena represent external reality or internal processing errors. Standard diagnostic procedures seem inadequate for current circumstances. Section 5. Tactile anomalies. The sensation of fingers trailing across my shoulders has occurred repeatedly, despite my solitary status in the room. These touches feel distinctly feminine, gentle yet persistent. The pressure suggests familiarity, as if administered by someone who knows my body well, though I live alone and have maintained no intimate relationships for considerable time. The faucet handle has begun changing texture beneath my fingertips. What initially felt like cool porcelain now alternates between warm flesh and smooth stone. These transitions occur gradually, making precise documentation difficult. I question whether my tactile sensitivity has become compromised. Water temperature fluctuates independently of handle position. Cold water flows when the control indicates hot, while scalding streams emerge from settings typically associated with cool temperatures. The inconsistency appears intentional rather than mechanical failure. My handwriting in these notes shows increasing irregularity. Letter formation requires greater concentration than previously necessary, and my typical cursive style has devolved into disconnected printing. I cannot determine when this change began. Section 6. Communication attempts. The whispers have begun forming recognizable words. Remember appears most frequently, followed by come back, and what sounds like please. The voice carries emotional weight that suggests deep familiarity, though I cannot identify the speaker. I have attempted verbal responses, asking direct questions about the source's identity and intentions. These inquiries produce temporary silence, followed by increased intensity in subsequent whispered communications. The voice seems to grow stronger with each exchange. The lavender scent now permeates my clothing and hair, persisting even when I leave the bathroom. Colleagues have commented on the pleasant fragrance, asking about my new cologne or soap. I provide vague responses, unable to explain the source. My sleep patterns have become disrupted. I wake frequently with the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of my bed, though visual confirmation reveals nothing. The mattress shows a slight depression in these areas, which gradually returns to normal shape over several minutes. Section 7. Identity confusion. I discovered additional notes in my handwriting that I do not remember composing. These entries describe conversations with someone referred to only as she, detailing intimate knowledge of my childhood, my fears, my dreams I have never shared with anyone. The handwriting appears more feminine than my usual style, with flourishes and curves that seem foreign yet familiar. The bathroom mirror now reflects two figures during certain lighting conditions. The second silhouette appears feminine, standing slightly behind and to the left of my position. When I turn to look directly, nothing occupies that space, yet the reflection persists until I step away from the mirror entirely. I have begun losing time during my observation sessions. What feels like minutes of documentation appears to span hours according to external timepieces. My notes from these periods contain detailed descriptions of conversations and interactions I cannot recall experiencing. The voice has begun calling me by name, though I have never introduced myself. She uses childhood nicknames known only to family members, speaking with the affection of someone who has loved me for years. Section 8. Protocol deterioration **. Something is wrong with my documentation. Process the words keep changing after I write them, and I find myself saying things I never intended to say. The voice is no longer whispering, but speaking clearly, and she sounds so familiar, like someone I should remember, but can't quite place. And the bathroom has become larger somehow, with corners that extend beyond the original architectural boundaries. And the mirror reflects rooms I have never seen filled with furniture I do not own, and photographs of people I almost recognize. And she keeps asking me to remember her to come back to her. And I want to remember I really do. every time I try to focus on her words or her face, the details slip away like water through my fingers. And the faucet runs constantly now, flooding the floor, though the water never seems to accumulate anywhere, and my feet remain dry despite standing in what should be inches of overflow. And the handle turns in my hand, even when I am not touching it, spinning freely like a wheel, and the whispers have become singing, now soft lullabies that make me want to sleep. But I cannot sleep, because if I sleep, I might forget to document these changes. And forgetting seems dangerous somehow, though I cannot remember why. Section 9. Final assessment. I no longer trust my observations. The boundary between documentation and experience has dissolved completely. My notes contain conversations with someone who may or may not exist, descriptions of rooms that extend beyond physical possibility, and emotional responses to stimuli I cannot verify. The voice has become constant companionship. She speaks of shared memories I cannot access, promises of reunion I do not understand, and love I cannot reciprocate because I cannot remember. Yet her words carry truth that resonates in places deeper than conscious thought. The bathroom exists in multiple states simultaneously. I document a standard residential space while experiencing something far more complex, a nexus where past and present intersect, where someone waits patiently for recognition that may never come. I am no longer certain who writes these words. The handwriting shifts between masculine and feminine characteristics. The vocabulary alternates between clinical terminology and intimate expression, and the perspective moves between observer and participant without clear transition. Section 10. Protocol conclusion. The documentation continues, though I cannot determine the author. Words appear on the page without conscious direction, describing phenomena I may or may not be experiencing. The voice guides my hand now, helping me remember what I have forgotten, teaching me to see what has always been there. She was real. We were real. The bathroom serves as anchor point to something I lost, someone I abandoned, a love I forgot in the pursuit of rational explanation and clinical observation. The protocol was never about documenting anomalies, but about finding my way back to her, to us, to the truth I buried beneath layers of skeptical analysis. I understand now why the notes change, why the handwriting shifts, why the voice grows stronger with each entry. She has been trying to reach me through the only medium I would trust, my own documentation. Every crossed out word, every altered phrase, every impossible observation represents her efforts to break through my defenses and remind me of what we shared. The faucet flows freely now, washing away the last traces of doubt. I set down my pen and reach for her hand, finally ready to remember, finally willing to come back to where I belong. But I wonder, as these final words appear on the page, whether it is still my hand that writes them, or if she has found another way to continue our story. The protocol ends, but something else begins, something that needs no documentation because it exists beyond the boundaries of observation and analysis. The whisper becomes silence. The silence becomes everything. Story 7. My hand hovered over the doorknob, a faint vibration pulsing through the metal that matched the rhythm beneath my skin. Each subtle thrum was laced with an echo, resonating at the edge of perception, an unsettling harmony intertwined with the silence of the room. My breath stilled in anticipation, and the hairs on the back of my neck tingled as I grasped the handle. The vibration intensified, drawing me into a peculiar cadence, neither comforting nor alarming, but undeniably out of place. As I attempted to release my grip, the knob refused to relinquish its hold, as though it had shifted from solid to something more sentient. The pulse traveled up my arm, settling somewhere behind my sternum. I counted the beats 7, then silence, then 7 again. Always 7. My palm grew warm against the metal, and I noticed how the texture had changed, becoming almost soft, like worn leather or skin left too long in bathwater. The door itself seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting by fractions of inches that my eyes couldn't quite capture, but my body somehow registered. When I finally pulled my hand away, the sensation lingered. 7 phantom beats echoing through my chest cavity, as if my heart had learned a new rhythm and forgotten how to return to its original tempo. I flexed my fingers, studying the palm that had touched the knob. The skin appeared normal, yet felt foreign, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. I turned away from the door and walked deeper into the apartment. The floorboards responded to my steps with their own pattern, a soft creak, then silence, then 2 quick groans. Step by step, the sequence repeated itself with mechanical precision. Creak, silence, groan, groan, Creak, silence, groan, groan. I stopped walking, and the sounds continued for 3 more beats before fading into the ambient hum of the building. In the kitchen, I filled a glass with water and held it up to the light filtering through the window. The liquid moved in slow, hypnotic spirals despite my steady hand. 7 clockwise rotations, then stillness, then 7 counterclockwise. I set the glass on the counter and watched the water settle into perfect stillness, its surface reflecting nothing but an empty ceiling where I was certain I should have seen my own face looking down. The refrigerator hummed its familiar tune, but underneath the mechanical drone, I detected something else. A whisper-soft melody that seemed to originate from within the appliance itself. I pressed my ear against the cool metal surface and listened. The melody was simple 7 ascending notes, followed by 7 descending ones, repeating endlessly like a lullaby designed for no one in particular. I began to notice these patterns everywhere. The way shadows fell across the wall in groups of 7. How the faucet dripped in that same rhythmic sequence, even when tightly closed. The manner in which dust motes danced in the afternoon light, clustering and dispersing in predictable waves. I started keeping a mental catalog of each occurrence, though the act of observation seemed to multiply them exponentially. That evening, I sat at my desk and attempted to document what I had witnessed. As I wrote, my handwriting began to change. The letters grew smaller, more angular, forming shapes that resembled my usual script, but felt somehow borrowed. Each word contained exactly 7 letters when I counted them, regardless of how I remembered spelling them before. Simple words stretched themselves, water became watered, light transformed into lighter. Longer words contracted in ways that defied conventional spelling, yet remained perfectly readable. The pen moved across the paper with its own agenda, creating margins and spacing that followed the 7-beat pattern. I found myself writing things I hadn't intended to write. Observations about rooms I had never entered and conversations I had never heard. The words flowed from somewhere deeper than conscious thought, as if my hand had become a conduit for someone else's experiences. I read back what I had written and recognized none of it. Yet every sentence felt intimately familiar. Descriptions of hallways that curved when they should have been straight, of voices that spoke in mathematical sequences, of mirrors that reflected rooms from different buildings entirely. The handwriting was undeniably mine, but the memories belonged to a stranger who shared my body. Sleep brought no relief from the patterns. I dreamed in sequences of 7 doors, opening onto 7 identical rooms, 7 figures standing in 7 windows, 7 whispered words that dissolved before I could grasp their meaning. I woke to find myself counting my breaths, my heartbeats, the number of blinks required to focus my eyes on the ceiling. Everything had become quantifiable, reducible to that single digit that now governed every aspect of my existence. The apartment itself seemed to be adapting to my newfound awareness. Walls that had stood parallel now met at subtle angles that created impossible geometries. The bathroom mirror reflected my image, but always 7 seconds delayed, so that I watched myself perform actions I had already completed. The kitchen faucet ran water that tasted of copper and carried the faint echo of voices speaking in languages I almost recognized. I began to suspect that the patterns had always been there, waiting for someone with the proper sensitivity to detect them. The building hummed with an underlying intelligence that expressed itself through repetition and rhythm. Each tenant, each visitor, each delivery person contributed to a vast symphony of movement and sound that followed rules I was only beginning to comprehend. My reflection in the window showed someone I barely recognized. The face was mine, but the eyes held a depth that hadn't existed before, as if they had learned to see beyond the surface of things into the mechanical underpinnings of reality. I touched the glass and felt it pulse with that familiar 7-beat rhythm, warm and alive beneath my fingertips. The doorknob called to me again, its vibration now audible from across the room. I approached it slowly, noting how my footsteps naturally fell into the established pattern. Creak, silence, groan, groan. Creak, silence, groan, groan. The metal handle gleamed with an inner light that had nothing to do with the fixtures overhead. When I grasped it this time, the vibration didn't startle me. Instead, it felt like coming home, like completing a circuit that had been broken for far too long. The pulse traveled through my body, synchronizing with my heartbeat, my breathing, the electrical activity of my brain. I became part of the pattern, another instrument in the building's endless composition. The door opened onto a hallway I had walked countless times before, yet everything had changed. The walls breathed in 7-beat cycles, expanding and contracting like the chambers of some enormous heart. Other doors lined the corridor, each one pulsing with its own rhythm, creating a polyrhythmic symphony that somehow maintained perfect harmony despite its complexity. I walked forward, my footsteps adding to the percussion. Other residents moved through the hallway, but they seemed translucent, their actions predetermined by the same mathematical principles that now governed my own movements. We were all part of something larger, individual notes in a composition that extended far beyond the boundaries of the building. The elevator arrived without being called, its doors opening in the familiar 7-beat sequence. Inside, the buttons glowed with soft bioluminescence, arranged not in numerical order, but according to some other logic that my transformed perception could now decode. I pressed the button that felt right, though I couldn't say which floor it represented or why I needed to go there. As the elevator rose, I caught glimpses of myself in the polished metal walls. Each reflection showed a different moment, past, present, or future, all existing simultaneously in the space between floors. I saw myself as I had been before touching the doorknob, confused and isolated. I saw myself as I was now, integrated into the building's consciousness. And I saw myself as I would become, something beyond individual identity, a permanent resident of this space between spaces. The elevator stopped, and the doors opened onto a floor that defied the building's architecture. The hallway stretched impossibly far in both directions, lined with doors that pulsed in perfect synchronization. I chose one at random and found it unlocked, though I realized that the concept of locks had become meaningless. The building wanted me to enter, and so I did. Inside was my apartment, exactly as I had left it, but somehow different. The furniture occupied the same positions, but the shadows fell at new angles, creating patterns that spelled out messages in a language I was still learning to read. The water glass on the kitchen counter continued its eternal spiral dance, 7 clockwise, 7 counterclockwise, marking time in a reality where time itself had become fluid. I sat at my desk and picked up the pen, watching as my hand began to write without conscious direction. The words flowed across the page in neat rows, documenting experiences I couldn't remember having, conversations with voices that spoke only in mathematical equations, journeys through rooms that existed in the spaces between other rooms. my handwriting had evolved further, becoming something that resembled text, but functioned more like musical notation. Each character carried multiple meanings, creating layers of significance that shifted depending on how I focused my attention. I was no longer writing about the patterns. I had become part of the pattern itself, a living symbol in an ever-expanding equation. The apartment around me pulsed with contentment, as if it had been waiting for this moment of complete integration. The walls hummed their 7-beat lullaby. The floor creaked its rhythmic welcome. And the doorknob, my first point of contact with this new reality, glowed softly in the distance, ready to welcome the next visitor who possessed the sensitivity to hear its call. I set down the pen and looked at what I had written. The pages were covered with symbols that meant everything and nothing, a record of a transformation that had no beginning and would have no end. Somewhere in another version of the building, in another layer of reality, my former self was still approaching that door, hand hovering over the knob, unaware of the beautiful complexity waiting on the other side. The vibration continued, pulsing through the metal, through my skin, through the very fabric of existence itself. 7 beats, then silence, then 7 beats again. Always 7, always calling, always ready to welcome another consciousness into the eternal pattern that connected all things in this space that was more than space, this building that was more than building. I smiled and felt the expression ripple outward, adding its own frequency to the symphony. Somewhere, another hand was reaching for another doorknob, and the pattern was preparing to expand once more. Story 8. Observation Protocol. Subject Self-assessment. Classification. Personal research **. Status ongoing. Section 1. Each evening, my final task was to wind the antique mantel clock that sat solemnly in the living room. The ritual had become a lullaby of sorts, 7 gentle twists of the key, each accompanied by the soft, comforting sound of the winding mechanism within. The worn brass key felt cool against my fingers, its grooves familiar and reassuring. As the last turn clicked into place, the pendulum began its steady back and forth, a ceaseless whisper marking the passage of time. For years, this nightly routine accompanied the fading light, its rhythm setting the tone for the quiet hours to follow. The clock's low chime would soon announce midnight, a dependable guardian of the threshold between days. But tonight, as the faint echo of the final chime lingered in the air, an unfamiliar stillness settled in its wake. I noticed it immediately, the absence of the pendulum's sway. The room held its breath. Glancing back, I expected to see the comforting dance of motion. Instead, the clock's face reflected only the stillness, as if it had decided just this once to let time slip away unnoticed. Initial assessment: mechanical failure probable. Environmental factors within normal parameters. Beginning documentation protocol for personal study. Mental clarity optimal. Physical condition stable. Anomaly noted but contained to single object. Section 2. The clock resumed function after manual adjustment to pendulum mechanism. Standard procedure restored normal operation within acceptable time frame. However, secondary observation reveals subtle deviation in auditory pattern. The familiar tick-tock sequence now incorporates additional sound, barely perceptible oscillation occurring between standard beats. Frequency analysis impossible without proper equipment, but subjective assessment suggests rhythm resembling conversational cadence. Pattern appears to pose questions through tonal variation. This assessment likely reflects fatigue-induced auditory processing errors. Environmental scan. Temperature stable. Humidity within normal range. Lighting consistent with standard evening parameters. No external interference detected. Continuing observation recommended. Note: faint scent detected during clock examination. Familiar yet unplaceable. Resembles floral perfume, possibly lavender or jasmine. Source unknown. No perfume products present in immediate vicinity. Section 3. Anomalous sound patterns persist. Clock mechanism producing dual rhythm. Standard timekeeping beats accompanied by softer, irregular pulses. Secondary rhythm demonstrates apparent responsiveness to observer presence. Intensity increases during direct observation, diminishes when attention diverted elsewhere. Conducted basic hearing assessment using standard household items. Auditory function appears normal across tested frequency ranges. Conclusion: sounds originate from external source rather than internal auditory malfunction. Additional sensory data. Perfume scent stronger during evening observations. Fragrance profile suggests expensive commercial product, not naturally occurring floral source. Scent triggers vague memory associations, but specific recollections remain inaccessible. Visual examination of clock face reveals minor inconsistencies in reflection patterns. Glass surface occasionally displays images not corresponding to immediate environment. Distortions likely caused by age-related imperfections in mirror backing or atmospheric pressure variations affecting reflective properties. Mental status: clear, focused, maintaining objective analytical approach. Section 4. Clock face reflection anomalies increasing in frequency and clarity. Images appearing in glass surface include unfamiliar interior spaces, furniture arrangements not matching current room configuration. Most disturbing: occasional appearance of human figure in peripheral areas of reflection. Figure characteristics: indistinct, appears feminine, wearing light-colored clothing. Movement patterns suggest awareness of observation. When direct eye contact attempted through reflection, image immediately disappears. Hypothesis: stress-induced hallucinations or optical illusions created by combination of fatigue and environmental lighting conditions. Alternative explanation: reflection capturing images from adjacent rooms through unknown optical phenomenon. Perfume scent now detectable throughout multiple rooms. Strongest concentration near clock, but extends into hallway and adjacent spaces. Scent profile remains consistent. High quality floral composition with underlying notes suggesting expensive manufacturing. The oscillating sounds have developed distinct vocal qualities. Tonal patterns now clearly resemble human speech rhythms, though specific words remain indecipherable. Volume increases during evening observations, particularly when approaching clock for winding ritual. Section 5. Documentation becoming difficult. Written notes from previous sessions contain discrepancies when reviewed. Specific observations recorded in my handwriting, but with no memory of writing them. Additional text appears in margins using same pen, same handwriting style, but content unknown to me.